Recently, I uploaded a video called Scary and Strange Stories. In that video, I mentioned that I get sent stories all the time that don't really fit my typical supernatural and natural videos. I'm not really a fan of the whole let's not meet stalker story thing, but since you guys enjoyed that video so much, I figured I'd share a few more that have been sent to me. Might as well read them and not let them go to waste. Joining me today is my good friend Blue Spooky. He's a pretty old school storyteller, and he's trying to get back in the game. So, if you enjoy his voice, be sure to check out his channel. You can find it in the description down below. If you guys have a story you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a stalker story, a ghost story, or something different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Stories like yours that help keep this show going. Now, without further ado, let's get into these creepy, allegedly true stories sent in by viewers just like you. A couple of years ago, when I was 16, my friend's mom got me a job as a janitor for a big building where people work in cubicles, and I'd have to vacuum once everyone had left, from 7 p.m. to 12 a.m. The job was a 45-minute drive, and my parents wouldn't allow me to drive that far at night, which forced me to take 2 trains. One from a station close to home that would take me downtown, and then I would take the second one, which would take me to my job. It took the train to get to my stop about 45 minutes since it has to do many stops. This one day, I had lunch on the first train, which caused me to be sleepy during the second train, and eventually making me fall asleep. When I woke up, I realized I had missed my stop, but only by 4 or 5 stops. Naturally, I got anxious though, and got off at the next stop right away. The first thing I noticed was that it was raining, and getting sort of dark since it was wintertime. So, as soon as I got off, I went inside one of the 2 cabins to wait for the train that would take me back to my stop. I was the only person on the platform, and I'm not gonna lie, I had a strong loneliness and a spooky kind of feeling. I had my headphones in, while I was looking around at the time, trying to figure out when the next train would come and pick me up, and also texting my manager that I would be a little late. Out of nowhere though, I noticed 2 Asian ladies in their mid-30s approaching the cabin. I didn't think anything of it since it was raining. I just thought they wanted a roof as well. But they were closer to the other cabin, so I wondered why they didn't go to that one. When they got to where I was, I heard them say something to me, so I stood up and took my headphones off to pay attention to what they needed. This is where it gets weird. Both of them got really, really close to me, not leaning but standing literally inches from my face. Then they opened their mouths to say something. I immediately noticed them that they had yellow and extremely crooked teeth and had very repulsive breath. They really loudly started saying the words, "I want phone. Can I have your phone? Give phone." With really heavy Asian accents. All of this while they had a very creepy big smile with their eyes wide open. It was so creepy. The second I tried to back away, one of them put their arm on my shoulder and said, "Hey, shh, shh, shh," with that creepy smile still on their faces. I wasn't scared since I've always been the big tough brother figure, so I'm always ready to defend myself from anything. I pushed her arm off as I was getting annoyed, and right at that moment I heard the train pulling up to the platform, so I got on it and sat on the very front and waited for it to leave. I was distracted, texting my manager that I was on my way, so I momentarily forgot about the crazy ladies until I remembered, and just to make sure, I looked back at the very end of the wagon, not expecting really anything, but, to my surprise, there they were, staring at me with the same crazy smile. And since now we were a couple of meters away from each other, their eyes seemed to not have color, which just made the situation even creepier. I continued looking back every minute or so, and they kept switching seats to get closer to me, all whilst staring at me. I finally arrived at my stop, so I got up and kept my eyes on them with a mad expression on my face, kind of expecting them to get off as well, but they just stared back smiling, waved goodbye, and stayed seated until the train left. I felt a huge weight off my shoulders and walked to the building I work at. But I just kept thinking about what had just happened during my shift, and since there were very few people who work in this huge building, it made me feel very unsettled for the rest of the night.
I'm a girl. My mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a child. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7, so my awareness and understanding of things happening may not totally make much sense. This all happened in the 90s. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. I'm not sure what time it was either, but I assume it was very late because there weren't any cars on the street, and I was sleeping in the back seat. I don't even remember getting into the car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open, and someone violently grabbed me by the arm and yanked me out of the car. I started screaming and crying until the man that had grabbed me looked me in the eyes and said, "Be quiet and don't try to run or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard and looked just like a madman. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by the arm, shut the car door and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that my mom would come out at the last second and save me. I looked at the house as long as I could, as the man dragged me further and further away. As we walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was in shock and fear. I didn't know what to do. If I sniffled or cried at all, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. I can't even explain how scared and confused I was. We walked for a little while, and finally ended up in the projects. The projects were a bunch of buildings crammed together in a shitty neighborhood. We walked into one of the buildings and started to walk up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt like hell at this point, but I was too scared to stop moving or complain. We walked up another flight of stairs when I saw a random man smoking a cigarette in the stairway. Then, without warning, the guy that kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. I didn't know how the kidnapper fell to the ground so fast, but the next thing I remember is the cigarette man was punching and kicking the kidnapper in his head and face. The kidnapper was out cold. The cigarette man picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and threw him straight down the stairs. You have no idea how scary and violent it is to see an unconscious man fall down the stairs. To this day, I still have a fear of them. He bled everywhere. I have no idea how the man with the cigarette knew to help me, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he could see the tears in my eyes. Maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe, but he acted instantly. The first second he could, he attacked my would-be kidnapper. The cigarette man started pacing back and forth, swearing at himself and gritting his teeth, clenching his fists together. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, Okay, shut up." He had an attitude to him, so I listened to him out of fear. I wasn't as scared of this man as much as the bearded guy, but I still was afraid. He started to ask me questions with a bit of an attitude. "Why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you even talk to strangers?" I was in so much shock and confusion, I couldn't answer the man's questions correctly. He asked me if I knew my way home, and I told him that I didn't. I told him a broken story about what happened, and somehow with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road is passing a house with Christmas lights on it, despite Christmas already being over. I think he knew the area well enough, and figured out where I needed to go from that information, but I honestly don't ever remember telling him about the Christmas lights. Anyways, he promised he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him or anyone that looked like him, and made me promise that I wouldn't even tell the police anything. He had an attitude, and I didn't care what he asked me. I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded man was still laying on the ground, bleeding out at the bottom of the stairs. He wasn't moving at all. For all I know, he was dead, and I kind of hope he was. The cigarette man stepped over the bearded guy, and I followed. He walked outside, and he looked a bit panicky. I remember him telling me over and over, "The police don't like me." We walked out of the projects, and my feet still hurt a bit. The man was walking fast in a panic, and I had to basically jog to keep up with him. I started crying, and he asked me what was wrong. I told him my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms, and he walked down the road for a moment. Then I remember him swearing and running behind a house or a building. A cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried to run, but my legs could barely move, and I was scared. The car kept driving and rode away without seeing me, before I could even remotely get close to it. He kept swearing to himself as he picked me up again and ran down the street. He took me behind a lot of houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. I assume now that the police were looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road, when I saw my mom in her car in the distance. She was surrounded by police. The man put me down and told me to go over to her. I got so excited the pain in my legs disappeared. He put me down and ran away in the other direction. I ran towards the police and my mom. My mom picked me up and hugged me tight. The police started to ask me and my mom questions. I don't remember too much about their questions, but I remember my mom telling the police some convoluted story that didn't make any sense. She basically told me not to say anything, and I didn't say much but cried a whole bunch. We went home. Days later, my dad picked me up and knew right away that something was wrong. I told him everything that had happened, and I never lived with my mom again. When I grew up, I had time to think about that day. I never forgave my mother. Not too long ago, I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation, and he told me what he thinks happened from what I explained to him from years ago. He said my mom was on a drug binge. I got kidnapped and someone saved me, but the person that saved me had warrants out for him. He wasn't mad at me. He was just frustrated with the situation that he had to deal with. Imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you have a kidnapped girl with you, and you just beat a guy half to death. If he would have gotten caught with me, he could be in jail for my kidnapping. With my mom lying and me being in shock and confused, I wouldn't be able to tell them that the man had helped me, because while it was all happening, I didn't even notice that he was. So, to the man that saved me, thanks.
This all took place in the summer of 2003, when I was about 7 or 8 years old. My family had just moved to the neighborhood located in Downey, California. For those of you who are not aware, Downey is in Southern California, about 10 miles east of downtown Los Angeles. We were getting in and getting to know our new neighbors. I was excited because the lady next door had 2 girls that were my age, so I had some kids to play with. As time went on, I became friends with the 2 girls, and we would go over to each other's houses to play. I started noticing that their mom was strange. One memory that stood out to me was when I was at their house watching movies one day, and I remember there was a door in their house that just stood out to me for some reason. I asked them what it was about, and they flat out told me that that door was their mom's quote-unquote secret room, and no one was ever allowed to go in there. I immediately got bad vibes off that, but quickly brushed it off because I didn't want to ruin the mood and make things awkward. Things really took a turn when my dad started noticing that the woman next door was weird. He told us a story about how when he was in the garage working on his car one night after work, she came by and was coming on to him, insinuating that he should take her inside because my mom was working late that day. When he told her to get lost, she wasn't too happy about it, and my dad said that she stared him down so hard before she left that she actually creeped him out. He said he didn't feel comfortable being alone in the house, so he went for a drive and didn't come back until he knew my mom would be home. When he pulled into the driveway, my mom had not returned home yet from work, but it was probably good that my dad beat my mom home because he encountered something shocking on the front step. On the front doorstep, my dad found what he could only describe as a weird, fleshy voodoo doll, and it smelled like dog crap left out on a hot summer day. The thing is, it's creepy enough in itself that there was a strange doll on the front step, but how did this thing get put together so quickly? My dad was gone for no more than 20 minutes tops, and when he asked the neighbors, no one seemed to have seen anything. My family lived in that house for only about 6 months because mainly the creepy lady next door. She just caused so many issues for us that it was unbearable to live there. I was upset that we had to move again, but happy that we would be away from her. My family is very religious, and we suspect the woman next door was participating in some sort of witchcraft, so there was no way we could continue living there. The last time my dad told this story to me, I asked him how he got rid of the doll, and he said that he picked it up with a trash bag and threw it in the garbage bins that were in the street. I think about it time to time, and I think about that place that we lived, and sometimes I think about that woman next door with the 2 girls. I wonder whatever came of them and if they still live in that area. I no longer live in Downey, but I'm sometimes in that area to visit family. If you've ever experienced something similar to this, or know anything about that fleshy voodoo doll, please reach out. I'm open to all feedback, and thank you, Swamp Dweller, for agreeing to share my story.
First time posting, so play nice. This is 100% true, and I wanted to post it for a while, but I guess I was too scared until recently. This happened a couple of years ago now, but it's easily the scariest I've ever been through. I was doing my second year of my degree, so I worked at a well-known fast food restaurant. I don't want to get sued or whatever, but y'all are probably familiar with it. I was pretty good at my job, not that it was particularly difficult. I started off doing day shifts, which is when most of the staff worked. Places like that are a revolving door employment-wise. I worked there for 7 months, and I may as well have been a lifer. While working there, I worked for a time alongside a dude named Frank. Frank was older than me. I was 20 at the time, and I guessed he was in his early 30s. He had a pleasant-ish demeanor most of the time, but the dude was dumb as a pole. He constantly did things wrong, and was absolutely frustrating most of the time. More than that, though, he was just kind of weird. He just did weird things that didn't make sense to anyone but him. Because of this, I barely spoke to him unless I absolutely had to, and I wasn't all that bummed out when they decided to fire him. As far as I knew, that would be the last I ever saw of him, and I was pretty indifferent about it, other than the vague relief that I wouldn't have to work with someone incompetent again. A few months went on, and I was eventually moved to the morning shift. We're talking about 5 a.m. to 12 p.m. It sucked, but it meant I had afternoons free most of the time, which meant I could get ahead with university work. I generally only worked weekends, and any weekday that I didn't have university. At the time the story happened, I'd already found a new job, and I was on my final day of working for this fast food place. I actually had my first shift at the new place at 4 p.m. that day, and wasn't planning to work, but my manager begged me to train the new girl, and I agreed. I'd still have a couple of hours to change and nap after my shift, so I guessed it was no big deal. The day fell on a Wednesday, which I never usually worked, and I wasn't rotated to work on it. That's important to remember. So I get to the store at 5 a.m. and start training the new girl as usual. Everything is going pretty chill, and as per usual up until about 7 a.m. I look over the counter and see a familiar face. There was a line of customers, but he wasn't standing in it, more like next to it. I gave a brief, "Hi, Frank," and turned back to what I was doing. We weren't friends, and had barely ever spoken. I hadn't seen him in about 6 months, so I didn't want to have to give him any more of my time. The dude kept lingering there, though. He asked me how I was, and I said fine and asked him back. He said he'd found a new job, and I sort of nodded, but I was serving customers, and to be honest, I didn't really want to keep up a conversation. Then the really weird stuff began. He asked me if I wanted to hang out sometime, to which I snorted and said no. The woman I was serving gave an amused smile, which I returned. Frank wasn't sated, though. He asked again, and when I said no, he asked why. I said that I had a partner and that I was busy. He asked what I was busy with. I said that I was going to my hometown, which was true. I was going to do that after my shift at my new place, to see my mom. He asked what was there and why I was going. Frustrated, I told him that I was busy and that I needed to get back to work. It's been a couple of years, and honestly this was pretty traumatic, so I don't fully remember the events that happened next. What I do remember is that suddenly he started acting really weird. He was staring at me with wide eyes, like he didn't know what was going on. He walked around to the employee door and tried to go in. At that point, I ran over and held my hands up to him, not touching him, pointedly not touching him. I told him he couldn't come back here and that he had to leave right away. He was sweating by now and staring at me. He sort of mumbles something, sounding like he's agreeing with me, and even steps back a little. I tell him that he has to leave, that he has to go right now. One of the other customers sees this and says firmly, "Are you going to leave or what?" To which Frank nods but makes no move to actually go. He just stands there shaking. The problem with working in crappy places is that nothing works, so the employee door didn't lock. I closed the door anyway, and moved back so I was on the stairs up to the office, so I could see the CCTV feed. I look at the feed from the one pointed at the employee door, and he's just standing there staring at the door, unmoving. Meanwhile, the new girl is still serving customers, by the way. I was scared, so I texted my manager, who told me she was on her way, and just to hold tight. He was still standing there, so I asked her if it was okay to head up to the office, which she said was fine. It wasn't too busy, and honestly I wouldn't care if it was, so I head upstairs to the office. Just as I get there, I hear the voice of the new girl shouting, "Wait! Stop! You can't go up there!" And holy shit, I turn around and see Frank, dazed out of his mind, crawling up the stairs towards me. His eyes are wild, and he looks completely out of it. Once again, I hold up my hands and tell him to leave, but this time he seems completely incapable of listening. He just keeps walking towards me. I tell my manager in all caps, he's upstairs. Remember what I said about working in crappy places? Nothing works, which meant the door to the office didn't lock either. As he approached me, I slammed the door shut and pressed my back up against it. I was hoping that because he seemed so strung out, I didn't know if it was drugs or just some sort of mental break, he would just leave, but he didn't. The dude starts pushing on the door, grunting and moaning, and I felt like I was 100% in a horror movie. At this point, I just decide to call the police. I'm screaming on the phone to this girl, shaking. I've never had to call any sort of emergency services before or since, so the whole thing was just terrifying to me. And bear in mind, he's pushing and slamming on the door as I'm doing all this. She's asking me if I know what he wants, or if he has a weapon, and it dawns on me suddenly that I have no idea. As soon as the dispatch girl hangs up, I hear my manager's voice talking very firmly and sternly to Frank. From what I can tell, he sounds like he's sort of responding to her. I call out that I've called the police, and I don't move from the door. I hear the police soon enough, and they convince him to come downstairs. As he's going, he asks softly if I can come, at which point I scream, "What the hell?" because that was the last straw. Soon enough, a police officer knocks on the door and tells me they've taken him outside. He comes in and takes my statement. He tells me that all they could do was let him go since he didn't break the law. They said he didn't seem to be on drugs either. I'm scared, but I'm just sort of glad he's gone. You'd think that's where the ordeal ends, but apparently Frank had a little prequel in mind for me. After this whole thing, I grab my phone to text my partner, and I notice I've got a new email. I check it, and it's from about 6:30 that morning, from Frank. I don't remember all that was said, but it was essentially saying hello, asking how I was. He asked in the email if I'd like to go out sometime, and that I'd had a great impact on his life. I show my manager, and she guesses that he got my email from one of the email threads she used to send with the rotas attached. Remember earlier, though, how I said I hadn't been rotated to work on this day? That I never worked on Wednesdays? That he left before I started the early shifts. There was, in theory, no way he would know that I would be there, and yet somehow he did. I passed this info on to the police, who told me they still couldn't do anything, but that if I ever saw him in public again, even if he wasn't doing anything, to call them right away. I called my new workplace and very briefly explained the situation. They were nice and said I didn't have to come in that day, and that they hoped I was okay. My partner brought me home and helped calm me down while I sat, terrified and paranoid in my bed, until I eventually made my way back to my mom's place, which was far enough away that I felt safe. I eventually moved out of that town, but only 2 months ago. Up until then, I saw him everywhere I went, and I feared what would happen every time I saw him. Thankfully, up until now, I never have.
My name is Gerald, and I'm 22 years old. For the past year, I've encountered a buttload of crazy people and have accumulated even more crazy stories. While most of them would make you laugh your butt off, the one I've chosen to share was terrifying while it was happening and still gives me shivers when I remember it to this day. A little more than a year ago, I applied for and got a job at my favorite convenience store across the street from my house. I had moved there during my sophomore year in college and decided to stay after I left school. This little store has served as a savior to me. Living as a young man often does, I had very little money, but I was always confident I could find something to fill my belly regardless of how much was in my pocket at the time. So, when the time came and I was no longer able to rely on my parents for money, the corner store was the first place I went for a job. I was in luck. Only the day before, one of the employees was fired for stealing from the register. I took his place, and I've been here ever since. Like any other corner store, we sell alcohol, beer, wine, liquor, the whole beat. Naturally, this makes us a beacon for the local drunks. These folks have served as countless hours of entertainment. While most are harmless people, one specific occasion, a horribly violent outburst occurred. It was a quiet Saturday night, about an hour before close. Most of the regulars had made their appearances, a few more than once. The two involved in this incident had been in around 7 p.m. and had just returned. They were, or at least appeared to be, a couple. I'd seen them around the neighborhood since I'd moved in. The owner of the store said they'd been customers since he bought the store, and that was 13 years ago. Although they were not very talkative when they came in, I have never had any reason to believe that they could be violent. However, that night something had changed. Upon arriving the second time, they were straight to the cooler containing the quart and 40-ounce sized beers. Nothing out of the ordinary, as I said, but tonight an argument between the two started after their arrival. Initially, I couldn't hear what it was about, but soon I could hear everything they said across the store. I minded my own business for a while, but once the female began screaming curse words at the man, I felt I had to, at least, get them to take it outside. I wasn't sure what to say, but I began to walk to the opposite side of the store. Before I was halfway there, the man started screaming back at the woman. I'm not exactly sure what he said to him, but it had obviously infuriated him. Mere moments before, he had taken a quart bottle of Busch or some cheap other beer from the cooler. All of a sudden, he began striking down at the woman's head with it. I'm not sure if he thought it would break or if he intended on killing her with the nearest thing, but strike after strike he continued. It was a horrifying thing to witness. I blame the entertainment industry for giving people the false impression of how easy it is to break a beer bottle over someone's head. I assure you, it's actually quite very hard. Following the 5th or 6th strike, the woman had dropped completely to the floor and stopped moving. The guy stood over her for a moment, but looked up, and when I assumed he heard me running towards him, the second he saw me, he ran outside the door and disappeared into the darkness. The sight of her laying there made me sick to my stomach. The blood dripping from her ears was almost as shocking as the ever-growing pool around her head. It seemed like a bad idea to touch her, so I made the decision to let the paramedics check for her pulse. When they arrived, she was still alive, but they didn't give much hope for her survival. The cops certainly weren't in any hurry to get there, but when they finally did, 45 minutes later, I filled them in on what I had seen. From the way they reacted, I got a strong feeling that they were very familiar with the two. While on my shift a few days later, my boss called with some news. The female was brain dead, and her family had made the choice to let her pass. Unfortunately, now it was a murder. The cops had picked up the guy the following night. From the description my boss gave me, he didn't even seem to remember what had happened. The doctors that examined him said it was likely he truly may not remember what he did, because of the many years of alcohol abuse had possibly destroyed his brain. It sounds like he might not get the full punishment due to him under the law. I'm not really sure how I feel about that. Sometimes it seems like people really do get away with murder. Thanks for listening to these creepy, allegedly true stories sent in by viewers just like you. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you enjoyed my guest, Blue Spooky, please be sure to subscribe to him and check out his channel. You can find the link in the description down below. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a story that you can't explain or something else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. If you aren't aware, you can download your favorite Swamp Dweller scary stories on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and pretty much every other major podcast platform that there is. So, if you don't want to waste your mobile data or just simply don't have any, you have an option. It's almost Halloween, we're getting really close, so if you guys have any ideas what I should do for a special Halloween video, please comment them down below. I would love to see your ideas and potentially collaborate on them with you. As always, I do appreciate you guys watching the videos all the way to the end. Today, I don't have a code word, but I would like to let you know about the join option. Recently, YouTube has given me the memberships option, which you can now join. If you don't know what that is, you can hit the join button by my name or on my channel page and it'll give you all the information. It's a lot like Twitch and or Patreon. It's a monthly subscription where you get a bunch of cool benefits from the channel. Things like early access to new videos, special emotes, badges, and more. If you guys would like to support the channel, be sure to check out the join option. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.